My daughter-in-law broke into my apartment repeatedly. Not once, not twice. She broke in exactly 36 times in just 5 months. I know the number because I counted. I wrote down the date. I wrote down the time. I noted what she touched and what she took. When I finally asked her to stop, she laughed in my face. She told me I was overreacting. She told me I was becoming senile. She said she had a right to be there because she was family. So I did what any rational man in my position would do. I moved out quietly. I didn't say a word. I left the furniture. I left the keys in her possession. And I waited. A week later, my phone alerted me that the silent alarm had been triggered at 2 in the morning. That was when everything changed. That was when she realized she hadn't broken into her father-in-law's home. She had broken into a corporate asset owned by a multi-billion-dollar investment firm. And the police were already on their way. Before I tell you how I orchestrated the perfect legal trap for my own family, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that respect is earned, not inherited. My name is Gideon Cross. I am 72 years old. To my son and his wife, I am just a retired old man living in a Gold Coast apartment in Chicago, filling my days with chess and memories. They see my gray hair and my slow walk, and they assume my mind has slowed down to match my body. They assume I am soft. They assume I am vulnerable. They could not be more wrong. For 40 years, I was a forensic auditor for the largest firms in the country. My job was not to be nice. My job was to find the inconsistencies. My job was to find the missing money, the hidden assets, and the lies buried under mountains of paperwork. I made a career out of catching people who thought they were smarter than the system. I have not lost that skill. I have simply turned my attention from corporate embezzlement to domestic intrusion. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in October. It was a crisp, windy Chicago day. My chess club at the library had ended an hour early because the heating system failed. I took a cab home expecting a quiet afternoon with my books. I live in a pre-war building on Lakeshore Drive. It is a building with a doorman, heavy oak doors, and a sense of history. It was the home I shared with my late wife, Catherine, for 30 years. It is my sanctuary, or at least it was supposed to be. When I stepped off the elevator on the 12th floor, I noticed something immediately. The small brass lock on my front door was vertical. I always leave it horizontal. Always. It is a habit ingrained in me from decades of securing sensitive documents. I stood in the hallway, my heart rate remaining steady. Panic is for amateurs. Observation is for professionals. I pushed the door gently. It was unlocked. I did not call out, not call. I did not shout. I stepped inside, my footsteps silent on the thick Persian rug in the foyer. The apartment was quiet, but it did not feel empty. There was a scent in the air that did not belong there. It was a cloying floral perfume. Cheap, overpowering. It was the scent Rachel wore. My daughter-in-law. I walked towards the master bedroom. The door was ajar. Through the gap, I saw her. Rachel was standing in front of the full-length mirror. She had opened the cedar closet where I kept Catherine's things. The closet I had not opened in the 3 years since Catherine passed away, because the grief was still too sharp. Rachel was wearing Catherine's vintage mink coat. It was a coat I bought for Catherine in Paris in 1985. It was pristine. It was sacred. And Rachel was wearing it over her yoga pants, turning side to side, admiring herself in the glass. She was running her hands over the fur, assessing it, valuing it. She wasn't looking at it with reverence. She was looking at it like merchandise. I cleared my throat. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. Rachel jumped. She spun around, her eyes wide. But she didn't look guilty. She didn't look ashamed. She looked annoyed. She looked as if I were the one intruding. "Oh, Gideon," she said, letting out a breath. "You scared me. I thought you were at your chess game until 4. She didn't take the coat off. She stood there wrapped in my wife's memory, looking at me with a defiance that made my blood run cold. "What are you doing here, Rachel?" I asked. My voice was level. I did not raise it. "I'm just decluttering," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "I have a key, remember? Travis gave it to me in case of emergencies. I thought I would come over and help you organize. This place is a museum, Gideon. You have so much old stuff just sitting here gathering dust. You are wearing Catherine's coat," I said. "Well, someone should enjoy it," she replied, smoothing the fur. "Mom is gone, Gideon. It's been 3 years. Keeping this locked up is a waste. It's vintage. It's worth money. Or at least it would be if you didn't let it rot in this closet." "I was just checking the condition." "Take it off," I said. She rolled her eyes. She actually rolled her eyes at me in my own bedroom. "You are being so dramatic," she sighed. She slipped the coat off and threw it onto the bed. It landed in a heap. My hands twitched, but I kept them at my sides. "Leave," I said, "and leave the key on the table." Rachel laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "I can't leave the key, Gideon. Travis insists we have it. What if you fall? What if you have a stroke? You are 72. You are not exactly in your prime. We need access." "I am asking you to leave," I repeated. "Fine," she said. She grabbed her purse. She walked past me, bumping my shoulder. "You know we are just trying to help you. You should be grateful you have family who cares enough to check on you. Most old men rot alone for weeks before anyone finds them." She walked out the front door and let it slam shut behind her. I stood in the bedroom for a long time. I walked over to the bed and picked up the coat. I folded it carefully. I put it back in the cedar closet and locked the door. Then I went to my study. I opened the top drawer of my desk and took out a small black notebook. I picked up my fountain pen. I wrote down the date, October 12th, 2:30 p.m. Intrusion number 36. Unauthorized access to master bedroom. Violation of personal property. Attitude hostile and entitled. I sat there and looked at the list. 36 times. She had come in when I was at the grocery store. She had come in when I was at the doctor. She had come in when I was taking a walk. I knew because I placed small pieces of clear tape at the bottom of the drawers. I placed a single hair on the seal of the jewelry box. I arranged the papers on my desk in precise geometric alignments. Every time I came home, something was disturbed. A drawer was slightly open. A document was moved. A piece of jewelry was rotated. She was hunting. She wasn't cleaning. She wasn't checking on my health. She was taking inventory. She was calculating the value of my estate before I was even dead. And today she had grown bold enough to do it while I was likely to return. She was testing boundaries, and she had found that I was in her eyes a toothless tiger. That evening I called my son. Travis. He is 35 years old. He is a high school history teacher. He is a man who hates conflict more than he loves the truth. I told him we needed to have a family dinner. Tonight. I ordered food from the Italian place they liked. I set the table. I wanted to look them in the eye. They arrived at 7. Travis looked tired. He always looked tired these days. Rachel looked radiant, as if she hadn't been caught violating my privacy just hours before. She walked in and kissed my cheek as if nothing had happened. She even complimented the wine. We sat down. I waited until we were halfway through the meal. "I want my key back," I said. I placed my fork down. The silence at the table was immediate. Travis stopped chewing. Rachel sighed, putting on a performance of immense patience. "Dad." "We talked about this," Travis said, looking at his plate. "It is a safety issue." "It is a privacy issue," I corrected. "Rachel was here today. She was going through your mother's closet. She was wearing her coat." Travis looked at Rachel. She didn't flinch. She reached over and covered Travis's hand with hers. Honey, I told you, she said to him. I went over to clean up a bit. The dust in this place is terrible for Gideon's lungs. I was just moving things to clean the shelves. I tried the coat on for 2 seconds to see if it needed to be dry cleaned. Your father started shouting at me. He was very confused, Travis. He seemed disoriented. I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. I was not shouting. I was not confused. She is lying, Travis, I said calmly. She was not cleaning. She was shopping in my closet. Dad, Rachel said, her voice dropping to a whisper intended to sound like she was speaking to a child. You are forgetting things. Last week you left the stove on. We found it when we came by. Remember, I had not left the stove on. I never used the back burner. They had turned it on. I realized it now. They were gaslighting me. They were manufacturing evidence of my incompetence. I did not leave the stove on, I said. See, Rachel said to Travis. He doesn't remember. It is getting worse, honey. We can't give him the key back. If he falls and locks us out, he could die in here. We have to be responsible. We have to be the adults here. I looked at my son. I looked at the boy I had raised. The boy I had taught to ride a bike. The boy I had sat with while he cried out over his first breakup. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to say that his father was the sharpest man he knew. I waited for him to tell his wife that she had no right to touch his mother's things. Travis looked up at me. His eyes were pleading. He didn't want to fight her. He was afraid of her. He was afraid of losing her approval. Dad, just let her keep the key, okay, Travis said. It is for the best. She is just trying to help. You are getting older. We just want you to be safe. Please don't make this a big deal. My heart broke in that moment. It didn't shatter loudly. It just cracked quietly and irreparably. My son was gone. He was not my ally. He was her accomplice. He was weak. And in my line of work, a weak link is a liability that must be managed. I looked at Rachel. She was smiling at me. It was a small, triumphant smile. She thought she had won. She thought she had outmaneuvered the old man. She thought I was trapped. I took a sip of my wine. I let the silence stretch. I let them think I was processing my defeat. I let them think I was accepting my decline. You are right, I said finally. My voice was soft. I suppose I am getting older. I suppose I do forget things. Perhaps it is better if you keep the key. Rachel squeezed Travis's hand. See, she said. That is much better. We will take care of everything, Gideon. You don't have to worry about a thing. I nodded. I finished my dinner. I listened to them talk about their plans for the summer. I listened to Rachel talk about how they needed a bigger house. I listened and I calculated. They thought the conversation was over. They thought they had secured their access. They didn't know that the moment I said, "You are right," I had ceased to be their father and father-in-law. In that moment I became the auditor, and they became the subjects of an investigation that would end in their total liquidation. I walked them to the door an hour later. I hugged my son. I felt his body tense. He knew deep down that he had betrayed me, but he couldn't face it. "Good night, Dad," he said. "Good night, Travis," I replied. "Drive safe." Rachel patted my arm. "We will be by tomorrow to check on you," she said. "Don't lock the deadbolt." "I won't." I promised. I closed the door. I heard the elevator ding. I waited until they were gone. Then I locked the deadbolt. I locked the chain. I walked back to my study. I opened my notebook. I turned to a fresh page. I wrote down the date. I wrote down the objective liquidation of assets and removal of hostile elements. They wanted the apartment. They wanted the control. They wanted the inheritance. They saw me as a senile old obstacle standing between them and a fortune they hadn't earned. They thought they were playing a game of patience. They didn't know I was playing a game of chess, and I was already 5 moves ahead. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. It rang twice. "Cole," I said when the voice answered. "It's Gideon. I have a job for you." "No, it is not corporate. It is personal. I need you to set up a blind trust, and I need you to find me a rental." "Yes, tonight. I am moving." I hung up the phone. I looked around the apartment. It was filled with 40 years of memories. It was beautiful, and it was compromised. It was no longer a home. It was a trap, and I was not going to be the mouse. I was going to be the one snapping the bar shut. I went to the bookshelf and pulled out a small hidden camera I had used in a fraud case years ago. It was the size of a pinhead. I walked to the living room. I mounted it inside the frame of the portrait of Catherine and me on our wedding day. It faced the entire room. If Rachel wanted to come in, I would let her. I would let her feel comfortable. I would let her think she owned the place. I would let her hang herself with her own greed. I poured myself another glass of wine. I sat in my leather chair in the dark. I watched the city lights of Chicago flicker outside. I was alone. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel lonely. I felt focused. They wanted a war. They wanted to strip me bare. They were about to learn that when you strip a warrior of his armor, you don't make him vulnerable. You just make him lighter, and much, much faster. The next morning, the real work began. I didn't wait for them to come back. I didn't wait for the next intrusion. I initiated the protocol. I treated my own life like a crime scene, and I began to secure the evidence. I went to the bank first thing in the morning, not the branch near my house where Travis knew the tellers. I went to the main headquarters downtown. I asked to see the regional manager, a man named Henderson, whom I had cleared of an internal audit 10 years prior. "He owed me," Gideon Henderson said, shaking my hand. "It has been years." "You look well." "I need to move my liquid assets," I said, cutting through the pleasantries. "All of them. Today." Henderson looked at me. He saw the look in my eye. He stopped smiling. "Is everything all right?" "No," I said. "My security has been compromised. I need to transfer everything into the new trust account, and I need to revoke a power of attorney document that I suspect is about to be presented to you." Henderson nodded. He typed on his keyboard. He frowned. "Gideon, there was an inquiry on your safe deposit box yesterday afternoon. A Travis Cross called. He claimed he had lost the key and needed to schedule a drilling. He said he had your authorization." My blood ran cold. Yesterday afternoon. Before the dinner. Before the gaslighting. Travis had already tried to breach the bank. He hadn't just sided with Rachel at dinner. He had been active in the scheme. "Did you grant him access?" I asked. "No," Henderson said. "He didn't have the paperwork. He said he would bring it later this week." "Block it," I said. "Seal the box. No access for anyone but me with 2 forms of ID and a biometric scan. And Henderson, if he comes back, do not tell him I was here. Tell him there is a regulatory freeze on the box. Tell him it is a system error. Tell him anything. But do not let him know I am onto him." "Understood," Henderson said. I left the bank with my finances invisible. I walked out onto the busy street. The wind was biting. I pulled my coat tighter. I felt a grim satisfaction. Step 1 was complete. They could try to rob me now, but they would find empty vaults. But the apartment was the real prize. The apartment was worth $2 million. It was the crown jewel. Rachel didn't care about my savings accounts. She probably didn't know how much was in them. But she knew the value of Gold Coast real estate. She walked through those rooms, measuring square footage with her eyes. She saw the view of Lake Michigan and saw dollar signs. She wanted to renovate it. She wanted to break down walls. She wanted to erase me from the space while I was still breathing. I hailed a cab. I gave the driver the address of my attorney's office. Cole was waiting for me. He was a shark in a three-piece suit. He didn't have a family. He didn't have hobbies. He had the law, and he wielded it like a scalpel. "We are going to sell the apartment," I told him, as I walked into his office. "Sell it?" Cole asked. "Gideon, that is your home." "No," I said. "It is a battlefield. I want to sell it. But I want to do it in a way that nobody knows. I want a sale-leaseback agreement. I want to sell it to an institutional investor, pocket the cash, and lease it back as a tenant. On paper, I will still live there. To the world, I will still be the owner. But legally, I will be a renter in a property owned by a massive, faceless corporation." Cole smiled. "That is devious," he said. "If they try to take the deed, they will find out you don't have it. If they try to claim it as inheritance, it won't be part of the estate." "Exactly," I said. "And if they break in," Cole's smile widened. "If they break in, they aren't breaking into an old man's apartment. They are breaking into corporate property. That carries different penalties. That brings in corporate legal teams. That is a felony with a lot of weight behind it." "Draw it up," I said. "I want it done by Friday." I spent the next 3 days moving the most precious things out of the apartment. I did it at night. I did it in small bags. I moved Catherine's urn. I moved her photo albums. I moved my journals. I moved the antique watches my father left me. I took them to a storage unit 3 miles away. I left the big furniture. I left the rugs. I left the old coats in the closet, the ones that didn't matter. I left the illusion of a life. The shell was there, but the soul of the house was gone. By Friday afternoon, the sale was finalized. The money, $2.1 million, was wired to the blind trust. I was officially a tenant in my own home. I was officially a millionaire who owned nothing on paper. I went back to the apartment on Friday evening. I sat on the sofa. I waited. I knew they would come. It was the weekend. They would assume I was asleep or distracted. At 7:00 p.m., I checked the feed from the hidden camera I had installed in the living room. I was in the study door closed. I saw the front door open. Rachel walked in. She didn't knock. She used the key. She had a man with her. He wasn't Travis. He was wearing a black t-shirt and jeans. He held a laser measuring tape. "This is the main room," Rachel said to him. Her voice was excited. "We want to blow out this wall here. Open it up to the kitchen. An open concept. It will increase the value by 20%. The man looked around. "Nice place," he said. "When do we start?" "Soon," Rachel said. "The current occupant. He is leaving soon. We are moving him to a facility. He is losing his mind. It is sad, really. But he won't need this space anymore." I watched them on my iPad in the study. My hand did not shake, my heart did not race. I felt a cold, hard clarity. She was planning to renovate my home while I was still living in it. She was planning to discard me like a piece of old furniture. I didn't walk out and confront them. That would be emotional. That would be messy. I let them measure. I let them plan. I let them dig their hole deeper. I saved the video file. I backed it up to the cloud. I labeled it Evidence Item Number 2, Conspiracy to Destroy Property. I waited until they left. Rachel didn't even check to see if I was home. She assumed I was out or asleep or irrelevant. She locked the door behind her. I walked into the living room. I stood where she had stood. I looked at the wall she wanted to destroy. "You want this apartment, Rachel?" I whispered to the empty room. "You want it so bad you can have it. Come and take it." I picked up my phone. I called the security company, the one run by an ex-Mossad agent I had audited years ago. "I need an upgrade," I said. "Silent alarm, motion sensors, and I need a smart lock that looks like a dumb lock. I want to be able to open and close this door from my phone from anywhere in the world." When the agent asked, "Tomorrow," I said. I am going on a trip, and I want the place secure before I leave. I was going to Florida, or at least that is what I was going to tell them. In reality, I was moving across the street, into the penthouse of the building directly facing mine. I was going to have a front row seat to the show. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. An empty apartment, a senile old man out of the way, and a safe full of secrets. I packed my final bag. I took one last look at the view of the lake. Goodbye home, I said. And then I prepared for the invasion. The glow of the iPad screen was the only light in my new penthouse living room. I sat in a high-backed leather chair, a glass of water untouched on the side table, watching my old life being dismantled pixel by pixel. I had set up the feed to record on motion, and the notification had come through at exactly 10 in the morning. I was safe in my new fortress across the street, invisible to them, but thanks to the pinhole camera hidden in the frame of Catherine's wedding portrait, they were perfectly visible to me. Rachel walked into my apartment, not with the stealth of a thief, but with the arrogant stride of a landlord. She was not alone. Following her was a man I did not recognize. He was tall, dressed in a black turtleneck and designer glasses, carrying a large architectural portfolio. He looked like the type of man who charged $500 an hour just to tell you your taste was outdated. I adjusted the volume on my iPad. The audio was crisp. The microphone I had installed was military-grade, capable of picking up a whisper from across the room. "This is the space," Rachel said, sweeping her arm across my living room. Her voice echoed slightly in the recording. "It feels cramped right now because of all this heavy, ancient furniture, but I want you to visualize the potential. We need to open it up. I want air. I want light. I want this entire floor to breathe." The designer nodded, tapping his chin with a stylus. He walked over to the east wall, the wall that separated the living room from the study. He tapped it with his knuckle. "Load-bearing?" he asked. Rachel laughed. It was a dismissive, airy sound. "Who cares? If it is, we will put in a steel beam. Money isn't the issue. The issue is that this layout is stuck in the 1990s. I want that wall gone. I want to be able to see the lake from the kitchen island." I watched as she laid her hand on the wall. That wall. That was the wall where I had marked Travis's height every birthday from age 3 to age 18. The pencil marks were still there, faint but visible, if you knew where to look, hidden behind the bookshelf I had moved just days ago. That wall held the history of my son's growth, a physical record of the years I spent raising him. And Rachel was talking about smashing it into dust because she wanted a better view while she drank her morning coffee. I picked up my fountain pen and opened my black notebook. I wrote down the time. 10:05 a.m. Subject: Rachel Cross. Accomplice: unidentified architect. Action: conspiracy to commit structural damage. The designer walked around the room looking at my things with a sneer that matched Rachel's. He stopped in front of the fireplace. The mantel was hand-carved mahogany, imported from England by my grandfather. It was a masterpiece of craftsmanship. "This has to go," the designer said. "It's too heavy. It swallows the room. We should replace it with floating concrete or maybe a sleek gas insert. Something minimalist." "Yes," Rachel agreed immediately. "Rip it out. It smells like old smoke and old men in here anyway. We need to gut everything. New floors, new molding, new lighting. I want recessed LEDs everywhere. No more of these dusty chandeliers." I felt a coldness spread through my chest. It wasn't the hot flush of rage. I was past that. This was the icy chill of absolute clarity. They weren't just talking about renovation. They were talking about erasure. They wanted to scrub every trace of Gideon and Catherine Cross from the face of the earth. To them, the apartment wasn't a home with a history. It was a square-footage asset that was currently being wasted on a relic. "And what about the current resident?" the designer asked, looking around. He lowered his voice slightly, though he didn't need to. Is he on board with this? It's a massive undertaking. There will be dust noise demolition crews. It's not exactly livable during the process. Rachel waved her hand as if swatting away a fly. Don't worry about Gideon, she said. Her voice was calm, matter of fact. He is on his way out. We are moving him to a facility in Florida next week. He thinks it's a vacation, but let's just say he won't be coming back to this address. He is losing it, poor thing. His mind is like Swiss cheese. He won't even remember he lived here by the time we are done. I paused the video. I stared at the frozen image of my daughter-in-law's face. She looked beautiful, composed, and utterly soulless. She had just declared me dead. Not legally, perhaps, but socially and functionally. To her, I was already gone. I was a problem that had been solved, a box that had been checked. She wasn't planning a renovation for a father-in-law she loved. She was preparing the nest for herself, built on the ashes of my life. I pressed play again. I needed to hear it all. I needed the full audit trail. So, the timeline, the designer asked. We need to start as soon as he leaves for the airport, Rachel said. I want the demolition crew here the next morning. If we move fast, we can have the walls down before he even lands. Once the destruction starts, there is no going back. Even if he throws a fit, he can't live in a construction zone. It forces his hand. It was a tactical strike. She was smarter than I had given her credit for. She knew that possession was 9/10 of the law, and that destruction was the other 10th. If she made the apartment uninhabitable for an old man, I would have no choice but to go where she dictated. She was weaponizing the renovation to evict me. I watched as they moved into the dining room. This was where Catherine and I had hosted 30 Thanksgiving dinners. This was where we had toasted Travis's graduation. This room is useless, Rachel said. Who uses a formal dining room anymore? We should turn this into a media room, or maybe a playroom for the kids we will have once we are settled. She didn't have kids. She didn't even like kids. But she knew that the prospect of grandchildren was a weakness for most grandparents. She had probably used that line on Travis to get him to agree to this insanity. The designer pulled out a laser measure. He started shooting red beams across the room, writing down numbers. He was calculating the cost of my oblivion. Budget, he asked. Rachel hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then she smiled. A predatory smile. Don't worry about the budget, she said. We have access to the equity. Once the old man is in the facility, we get power of attorney. The house is paid off. We can pull out a few $100,000 for the remodel easily. Just make it look expensive. I want people to walk in here and know we have money. I wrote that down verbatim in my notebook. Intent to defraud. Intent to misuse funds. Premeditated exploitation of a vulnerable adult. They spent another 20 minutes walking through the apartment. They went into the master bedroom. Rachel sat on my bed, the bed I had shared with my wife, and bounced a little, testing the mattress. We will need to burn this, she laughed. Get a California king. Something modern. And this closet? She pointed to the cedar closet where she had been caught wearing the coat. This needs to be doubled in size. I need a walk-in. Knock out the wall into the hallway. She was planning to destroy the cedar closet, the one place I had kept sacred. I sat back in my chair in the penthouse. My hand was steady as I closed the notebook. The video feed showed them leaving. Rachel locked the door behind her with my key, the key I had supposedly allowed her to keep because I was too senile to manage my own security. She checked her reflection in the hallway mirror before she left. She adjusted her hair. She looked satisfied. She looked like a woman who had just secured her future. She had no idea that she had just starred in the most incriminating piece of evidence I had ever collected. She thought I was the victim. She thought I was the confused old man being shipped off to Florida. She didn't know that she was the target. I saved the video file. I encrypted it. I sent a copy to the secure server at my lawyer's office. I sent another copy to a cloud account that only I could access. Then I stood up and walked to the window of my penthouse. I looked across the street at my apartment building. I could see the window of my living room. It was dark now. It looked peaceful, but inside the ghosts were being evicted. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. What remained was the professional obligation to correct an error in the ledger. Rachel and Travis were liabilities. They were bad debt. And as any good auditor knows, you do not negotiate with bad debt. You write it off. You liquidate the assets, and you close the account. I picked up my phone and called the security company again. "Move the installation up," I said. "I want the system live by tonight." But Mr. Cross, the technician, said, "We are still configuring the silent alarm protocols." "I don't care," I said. "Finish it remotely. I want that apartment turned into a steel trap by midnight." There was a pause. "Understood, sir. We will get it done." I hung up. I poured the water from the glass into the sink. I replaced it with a single measure of scotch. I toasted the dark window across the street. "Go ahead, Rachel," I whispered. "Knock down the walls. Plan your media room. Spend the money you don't have. You think you are renovating a home. You don't realize you are building your own prison cell." I took a sip of the scotch. It burned clean and sharp. I looked at my watch. It was noon. I had 12 hours before the trap was fully armed. I decided to spend the afternoon reading the fine print of the insurance policy on the apartment. I wanted to make sure that when the police kicked down the door, the damage would not be covered. I wanted to make sure that every single cent of the destruction she caused would come directly out of her pocket. Because that is how you hurt people like Rachel. You don't yell at them. You don't argue with them. You simply present them with a bill they cannot pay. I sat there for hours, the silence of the penthouse wrapping around me like a shield. I was alone, yes. But I was formidable. And as the sun began to set over Chicago, casting long shadows across the lake, I felt a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in years. The game was afoot, and it was my turn to move. The phone rang at exactly 11:15 in the morning. I was still sitting in the penthouse watching the digital feed of my empty apartment across the street, but I picked up on the first ring. My personal line was a number only 5 people possessed. 2 were dead. 1 was my son. 1 was my lawyer. And the last one was Robert Henderson, the senior branch manager of First National Bank of Chicago. Gideon Roberts' voice was tight. It was the voice of a man who was accustomed to whispering in marble hallways. "We have a situation at the downtown branch. I think you need to come in, now." I did not ask what the situation was. I did not ask if it could wait. In the world of high finance, a situation meant a breach, and a breach meant someone was trying to put their hands in my pockets. "I will be there in 20 minutes, I said. I hung up and put on my charcoal overcoat. I checked my reflection. I did not look like a victim. I looked like a man who was about to conduct a hostile takeover of his own life. The cab ride to the financial district was a blur of gray concrete and steel. I spent the time mentally cataloging my liquid assets. My portfolio wasn't just a retirement fund. It was the accumulation of 40 years of catching thieves. I had invested in the companies that survived my audits. I had bought into distressed assets during the savings and loan crisis of the 80s. I had quietly amassed a fortune that Travis knew nothing about. He thought I lived on a pension and Social Security. He thought the apartment was my only real asset. He was about to find out that he had been trying to rob a fortress with a plastic spoon. When I walked into the bank, the security guard nodded at me. I didn't stop at the teller line. I walked straight to the glass elevator and pressed the button for the private wealth management floor. Robert met me at the doors. He looked pale. He was a good man, a man I had mentored when he was a junior analyst caught in a bad situation with a corrupt vice president. I had saved his career. He had never forgotten it. "Come into my office," Robert said. He closed the blinds. That was never a good sign. He slid a piece of paper across his mahogany desk. It was a standard access request form for a safety deposit box. Box number 404. My box. The box that held the original deeds, the bearer bonds, and the physical ledger of my offshore accounts. I looked at the document. The date was stamped 10 a.m. this morning. The name on the requester line was Travis Cross, and at the bottom there was a signature, Gideon Cross. I stared at the signature. It was a good attempt. He had the slant right. He had the loop on the G correct, but he had pressed too hard on the downstroke. He had hesitated on the double S. It was a forgery. And it wasn't just a forgery. It was a betrayal written in blue ink. "He came in an hour ago," Robert said quietly. "He had a notary stamp on it. He claimed you were too ill to come in person. He said you needed documents for emergency medical surgery. He was very convincing, Gideon. He was crying. He said you were in the hospital." I felt a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. My son had walked into a federal bank and declared me dying to loot my vault. He hadn't just sided with his wife. He had become the architect of his own crime. "Did you let him in?" I asked. The paper didn't tremble in my hand. "No," Bert said. I flagged it. The notary seal looked fresh, but the commission number. I ran it. "It belongs to a notary who died 3 months ago." I looked up at Robert. Travis hadn't just forged my signature. He had used a stolen or counterfeit notary stamp. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a felony. This was federal fraud. "Where is he now?" I asked. "I told him there was a mechanical issue with the vault timer," Robert said. "I told him he would have to come back tomorrow." He was angry, Gideon. He was desperate. He was sweating. He kept checking his phone. He said he needed the contents today, or what I pressed. Or he was going to lose everything. Robert finished. He muttered something about a deadline. I sat back in the leather chair. A deadline. That explained the urgency. That explained the renovation plans. That explained the gaslighting. Travis wasn't just greedy. He was in debt. Deep debt. The kind of debt that doesn't come with a monthly statement, but with a threat. He needed my money not to improve his life, but to save it. And he had decided that my life was the price he was willing to pay. I looked at the forged document again. I took out my phone and took a high-resolution photograph of it. Evidence item number 3. Attempted bank fraud. "Robert," I said. "I want to execute the protocol." Robert blinked. The blind trust," I confirmed. "Are you sure?" Robert asked. "Once you do this, Gideon, you lose control. You can't access the money. You can't withdraw it. It goes into the management of the third-party administrator. You become a beneficiary of your own fortune with no power to direct the assets. It is a one-way door." "I am sure," I said. "Liquidity is vulnerability. As long as that money is in my name, as long as it is accessible by a signature, Travis will keep coming. He will try to declare me incompetent. He will try to get power of attorney. He will try to forge more documents. I need to remove the target. I need to make myself poor on paper." Robert nodded. He opened a file on his computer. He printed out a stack of documents 3 inches thick. "This transfer includes the liquid cash?" Robert asked. "All of it," I said. 8.5 million. "And the securities?" "Everything. The municipal bonds, the blue chip stocks, the index funds. Move it all." "And the beneficiary structure?" I looked at the paperwork. I picked up the pen. "Sole beneficiary during my lifetime is Gideon Cross," I said. "Upon my death, the trust dissolves, and the assets are to be liquidated and donated in full to the Forensic Audit Foundation for the prevention of elder financial abuse. Robert paused. He looked at me. Nothing for Travis. I looked at the forged signature on the desk. Travis has already taken his inheritance, I said. He took it in the form of the education I paid for. He took it in the form of the car I bought him. He took it in the form of the love I gave him for 35 years. He has spent it all. There is nothing left. Robert didn't argue. He knew better. He began to process the transaction. I spent the next 2 hours signing my name, over and over again. With each signature, I felt a weight lifting. I was severing the financial umbilical cord. I was turning off the tap. When the final document was signed, Robert stamped it. "It is done," he said. "The funds are moving now. By the time you walk out of this building, your personal accounts will show a balance of 0. Your debit cards will be declined. You will have a stipend card issued by the trust with a fixed monthly limit that cannot be exceeded. To anyone looking at your credit report, to anyone looking at your bank statements, you are now a man on a fixed income. You are untouchable." "Thank you, Robert," I said. "What about the safety deposit box?" he asked. "Drill it," I said. "Empty it. Send the contents to the trust custodian. Leave one thing inside." What I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single silver dollar. It was the first dollar I ever earned as a paperboy when I was 10 years old. I had kept it as a reminder of where I came from. "Put this in the box," I said, "and leave a note." I took a piece of bank stationery. I wrote 3 words, "Earn your own." I slid the note and the coin across the desk. "If he comes back," I said, "let him open it. Let him see it." Robert took the coin. He looked sad. He looked like he wanted to say something about family, about forgiveness. But he looked at the forgery again, and he stayed silent. I stood up. I buttoned my coat. I felt lighter. I was no longer a target. I was a ghost. "One more thing, Robert," I said at the door. "If anyone asks, if a lawyer calls, if a police officer inquires, I was here today. But I was confused. I was agitated. I closed my accounts because I was paranoid." Robert frowned. "You want me to support their narrative?" "I want you to lay the trap," I said. "If they think I am crazy, they will get sloppy. If they think I am sharp, they will be careful. I want them sloppy." Robert nodded slowly. A faint smile touched his lips. "You are a dangerous man, Gideon." "I am a thorough man," I corrected. I walked out of the bank and into the wind tunnel of the financial district. The sun was high and bright, reflecting off the glass towers. I checked my phone. I had 3 missed calls from Rachel, 2 from Travis. They were panicking. They must have tried to use one of the supplementary credit cards I had given them years ago for emergencies. The cards that were now dead pieces of plastic. I didn't call them back. I walked to a hot dog stand on the corner. I bought a Chicago-style dog with everything on it. I sat on a concrete bench and ate it. It cost me $5. It was the first purchase I made with my new stipend card. It tasted like freedom. Travis was desperate. That was the variable I hadn't fully calculated until today. Desperation makes people dangerous. It makes them irrational. He had tried to rob a bank in broad daylight with a fake stamp. That meant the clock was ticking faster than I thought. He owed someone money, someone who didn't care about family dinners or legal processes. And now Travis had no access to the cash. He had no access to the box. The only thing he had left, the only asset he could see, touch, and potentially liquidate, was the apartment. He didn't know I had sold it. He didn't know it belonged to a corporation. To him, it was the last lifeline. He would come for it. And he would come for it with everything he had. I finished my lunch. I wiped my mouth with the paper napkin. I looked up at the skyscrapers surrounding me. They were monuments to power, to money, to leverage. I understood this world. I knew how to use its weight to crush a bug. I hailed a cab. "Take me to the Gold Coast," I said. I needed to get back to the penthouse. I needed to check the cameras. Because now that I had cut off the money, the rats would be starving. And starving rats don't wait for invitations. They chew through the walls. I leaned back in the seat as the cab merged into traffic. I closed my eyes. I pictured Travis's face when he opened that safety deposit box. I pictured the silver dollar. I pictured the note. It wasn't cruelty. I told myself that firmly. It was education. I was teaching him the lesson I should have taught him 20 years ago. You do not take what is not yours, and you do not bite the hand that feeds you unless you are prepared to starve. The cab pulled up to my new building. I tipped the driver. I walked into the lobby, greeted the concierge who knew me only as the quiet tenant in 4B. I went up to my fortress. I poured a glass of water. I sat down in front of my monitors. The apartment across the street was still quiet. The afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It looked serene. It looked vulnerable. But it was a minefield, and I had just armed the final detonator. I checked the silent alarm status. Active. I checked the smart lock status. Engaged. I checked the motion sensors. Calibrated. Everything was ready. I pulled out my phone. I sent a text message to Rachel. Just one line. "I am leaving for the airport now. Florida is beautiful this time of year. Don't worry about the house, it is all taken care of." I hit send. I watched the screen. I waited. 10 minutes later, a notification popped up on my iPad. Motion detected at front door. I leaned forward. The camera feed flickered to life. Rachel was there. She was standing in the hallway. She was reading the text message on her phone. She showed it to someone standing just out of the frame. Then she smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a butcher eyeing a lamb. She reached into her purse. She pulled out the key, my key. She slid it into the lock. The show was about to begin. I picked up the phone and dialed a number that did not exist in my public contacts. It belonged to Marcus Thorne, a real estate broker who specialized in discretion. 10 years ago, I had uncovered a massive embezzlement scheme within his firm that would have sent him to federal prison for life. It turned out he was the one being framed by his partners. I proved his innocence. He had told me then that if I ever needed a ghost apartment, I should call him. It was time to call in the favor. "I need a unit in the Sovereign Tower," I said when he answered. "Specifically, I need a unit facing north with a direct line of sight to the 12th floor of the Regency building." Marcus didn't ask why. He didn't ask how I was. He simply typed on a keyboard. "Unit 14B is available," he said. "It is a corporate rental. Furnished. Vacant. The lease is held by a shell company out of Delaware. No names. No credit checks. Just a wire transfer." I wired the money from my new stipend account within 5 minutes. By 2 in the afternoon, a courier delivered a key card to my concierge. It was in a plain white envelope. No return address. Just a piece of plastic that unlocked my new command center. The Sovereign Tower was directly across the street. From the living room of 14B, I could see into my own apartment, as clearly as if I were watching a television screen. It was the perfect vantage point. It was the sniper's nest. Now came the hard part. The extraction. I could not hire movers. Movers talk. Movers leave paper trails. Movers would be noticed by the doorman, and the doorman talks to Rachel because Rachel tips him $20 every time she breaks into my house to buy his silence. I had to do this alone, and I had to do it at night. I waited until the city went to sleep. At 2 in the morning, the building was a tomb. The doorman was on his break or dozing in the back office. I took the service elevator. It was an old rattling cage that smelled of cleaning fluid and oil. It was the artery of the building that the residents ignored, which made it the perfect route for a phantom. I had bought a stack of black heavy-duty trash bags and 3 nondescript duffel bags. I did not pack clothes. Clothes are replaceable. I did not pack kitchenware. I could buy new plates. I packed the things that carried the weight of a life. First, I went to the cedar closet. I took Catherine's urn from the top shelf. It was heavy, made of polished marble. I held it in my hands for a moment. The stone was cold. I remembered the day I brought it home. I had promised her I would keep her safe. Leaving her here, in a place that Rachel treated like a discount boutique, was a violation of that promise. I wrapped the urn in a thick wool sweater. I placed it gently in the center of the first duffel bag. I patted it with my socks. I zipped the bag shut. It looked like gym gear. It looked like nothing. Next were the journals. I have kept a journal every day since 1978. They are not diaries filled with feelings. They are logs. They contain the details of every audit I ever conducted. They contain the names of men who went to prison because of my math. They contain the secrets of half the boardrooms in Chicago. If Rachel or Travis found them, they wouldn't understand them. They would probably throw them in a dumpster. But to me, they were my legacy. They were the proof that I had paid attention. I stacked the leather-bound notebooks into the second bag. They were heavy, dense with ink and truth. I lifted the bag. My shoulder protested. I ignored it. Pain is just a signal. You can choose to acknowledge it, or you can choose to complete the mission. I chose the mission. Finally, the watches. My father was a train conductor. He left me a pocket watch that had kept time for 40 years, almost, on the rail lines. I had added to the collection over the years. A Patek Philippe I bought when I made partner. A Rolex given to me by a client. They were in a velvet-lined case in the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't take the case, and the case was too bulky. I took the watches out one by one. I wrapped them in microfiber cloths. I put them in the inside pockets of my overcoat. I felt the weight of them against my ribs. Time. I was literally carrying time. I made 3 trips that night. Across the street, into the lobby of the Sovereign, up to the 14th floor, into the sterile beige luxury of the corporate rental. I placed the urn on the mantel of the fake fireplace. I stacked the journals in the closet. I put the watches in the safe provided by the rental agency. By 4 in the morning, my muscles were burning. My knees were stiff. But I wasn't done. The extraction was only half the job. The other half was the staging. I had to make the apartment look lived in. I had to make it look like I was just away for a week, not gone forever. If it looked abandoned, Rachel might get suspicious. She might realize the game had changed. I needed her to believe she was the predator. I needed her to believe I was the oblivious prey. I went back to the old apartment for the final time. I walked through the rooms. I adjusted the blinds. I left them half open just enough to let in the light, just enough to let me see in from across the street. I went to the kitchen. I left a coffee mug in the sink. I left a plate with a few crumbs on the counter. It was a calculated mess. It suggested a man who had eaten breakfast and rushed out to catch a flight. I went to the bathroom. I left my toothbrush in the holder. I left a bottle of blood pressure medication on the shelf. It was empty, of course. I had transferred the pills to a plastic bag in my pocket. But the bottle remained. A visual cue of my frailty. A reminder to them that I was old, sick, and dependent. I went to the bedroom. I stripped the bed. I threw the sheets in the hamper. I left the comforter rumpled. It looked like a bed that had been slept in. It looked intimate. It looked vulnerable. Then I went to the study. This was the most important part of the stage. The safe. It was a heavy steel wall safe installed behind a painting of a ship at sea. It was old school. Mechanical dial. no electronics. Travis had tried to crack it before. I had seen the scratches on the dial. He had tried to guess the combination. He didn't know the combination was the date of the first time I arrested a man for fraud. I opened the safe. It was empty now. The bonds were gone. The cash was gone. The deeds were gone. I placed a single stack of papers inside. They were old tax returns from the 90s. Useless, obsolete. But they looked official. They looked dense. I placed a small metal box on top of them. Inside the box, I put a handful of costume jewelry Catherine had used for theater productions. Glass diamonds, plastic rubies. To an untrained eye in the dark under the beam of a flashlight, they would glitter like a fortune. I closed the safe. I spun the dial. I locked it. It was the perfect bait. It was heavy. It was locked. It rattled when you shook the door. It promised wealth. It promised answers. It would keep them occupied for hours. It would keep them in the room long enough for the police to arrive. I stood in the center of the living room. The sun was starting to gray the sky over the lake. The apartment felt dead. The spirit had left it. It was just drywall and parquet floors now. It was just an asset. I looked at the wall Rachel wanted to tear down. I ran my hand over the plaster. I felt the ghost of the pencil marks where Travis had grown. I remembered measuring him. I remembered his excitement when he grew an inch. I remembered the boy who wanted to be tall. I didn't hate that boy. I missed him. But the man he had become was a stranger who forged my signature and wished for my death. That man was not my son. That man was a defendant. I walked to the front door. I checked the new smart lock I had installed hours earlier. The green light pulsed once. It was online. It was connected to my phone. I could lock and unlock it with a tap of my thumb. I stepped out into the hallway. I closed the door. I heard the bolt slide home with a heavy final thud. I didn't look back. I walked to the elevator. I rode down to the lobby. I walked past the sleeping doorman. I crossed the street to the Sovereign Tower. I went up to 14B. I locked the door. I engaged the deadbolt. I walked to the window. I picked up a pair of high-powered binoculars I had purchased that afternoon. I raised them to my eyes. I focused on the 12th floor of the building across the street. I could see my living room. I could see the painting of the ship that hid the safe. I could see the coffee mug I had left on the counter. It was a perfect diorama. A dollhouse waiting for the destructive children to come and play. I sat down in the leather chair by the window. I was exhausted. My body ached in ways it hadn't in 20 years, but my mind was electric. I felt a surge of adrenaline that was sharper than caffeine. I was ready. I picked up my phone. I opened the app for the security system. I checked the status. Armed. Silent mode active. I checked the app for the hidden camera. The feed was live. The image was clear. I was no longer Gideon Cross, the retired father. I was Gideon Cross, the auditor. And I was about to conduct the most aggressive audit of my career. I poured a glass of water. I took my real blood pressure medication. I watched the sunrise reflect off the glass of my old home. The trap was set. The bait was in the cage. Now all I had to do was wait for the rats to get hungry. And I knew with the certainty of a man who deals in numbers that hunger was a constant variable. They wouldn't wait long. They were desperate. They were greedy. And they were stupid. It was a fatal combination. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the fatigue wash over me. But I didn't sleep. I rested. I conserved energy. Because when the alert came, I needed to be sharp. I needed to be precise. I was the spider, and the web was trembling. The technician arrived at exactly 8 in the morning. His name was Silas. He was a man made of right angles, and Silas, a former military communications specialist who had transitioned into high-end private security. I had audited his firm 3 years ago. I found a discrepancy in their payroll, that was bleeding them dry, a ghost employee created by their own CFO. Silas respected me because I found the ghost. I respected Silas because he knew how to install a wire that no human eye could see. I let him into the empty apartment. The morning light was hitting the bare floors where the rugs used to be. The place echoed slightly, a hollow sound that pleased me. It sounded like a stage before the actors arrived. "I need the works, Silas," I said, "but I need it to be invisible." Silas didn't ask questions. He set his black tool case on the kitchen island. He opened it with a series of clicks. Inside, nestled in foam, were the components of my new reality. Sensors, cameras, microphones, and the brain of the system, a black box no larger than a deck of cards. We started with the front door. This was the critical point of failure for my son and his wife. They had a key. Rachel had fought for that key. She believed that key was her scepter of power. She believed it gave her the right to walk into my life whenever she chose. I needed to turn that key into a weapon against her. Silas removed the old deadbolt cylinder. It was brass scratched from 30 years of use. He replaced it with a biometric smart lock housing that had been custom machined to look exactly like the original vintage hardware. To the naked eye, it was just an old lock, but inside it was an encrypted digital fortress. "Here is the beauty of it," Silas said, his voice low and gravelly. "We program the cylinder to accept the physical key profile she has. So the key will turn, the bolt will slide back, the door will open." And then I asked. "And then the timer starts," Silas said. "The system recognizes that the door was opened mechanically, but not disarmed digitally. A standard user would punch in a code or use a fob. An intruder just turns the key. The system gives them 30 seconds to authenticate. If they don't, it doesn't beep. It doesn't flash a red light. It just wakes up." That was exactly what I wanted. I didn't want to scare them off on the doorstep. I wanted them inside. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them deep enough in the apartment that they couldn't claim they had just made a mistake and walked into the wrong unit. I needed them to commit. We moved to the hallway. Silas installed motion detectors inside the crown molding. He drilled holes the size of a pinhead, inserted the fiber optic lenses, and then filled the gaps with a putty that matched the paint perfectly. He worked with the steady hands of a surgeon. "These are thermal," Silas explained. "They don't just see movement, they see heat signatures. They can tell the difference between a curtain blowing in the wind and a human body moving toward the master bedroom. They map the path. We will have a digital trail of exactly where they went and how long they stood there." I watched him work. I thought about Rachel walking down this hallway just days ago, criticizing the wallpaper, planning which walls to smash. She had walked with such confidence. She had stomped through my home. Soon every step she took would be logged, time-stamped, and uploaded to a server that was beyond her reach. The living room was next. This was where I had placed the bait, the safe. I had already moved the real valuables, but the wall safe remained behind the painting. I needed the system to treat that room as a high-security zone. Silas installed a vibration sensor on the wall safe itself. If they touch the dial, Silas said, it triggers a level 1 alert. If they try to drill it, it triggers a level 2. If they try to pry it, it triggers a level 3. "Explain level 3, I said. Silas stood up and wiped his hands on a rag. "Level 3 is the panic protocol," he said. "It bypasses the monitoring center. It bypasses the courtesy call to the homeowner. It sends a direct digital packet to the Chicago Police Department's emergency dispatch." I nodded. "But a burglary call is low priority," I said. "The police might take 40 minutes. By then, they could be gone. I need them to be there in 5. I need lights and sirens." Silas looked at me. He hesitated. "There are ways to escalate the priority code," he said slowly. "But it requires a specific configuration. We have to program the system to report the intrusion not as a property crime, but as a crime against a person." "I am a 72-year-old man," I said. "I am supposedly senile. I am supposedly living here alone. If someone breaks in at 2 in the morning, the system shouldn't assume I am empty. The system should assume I am home and in danger. Silas understood. He tapped on his tablet. I can set the profile to occupied vulnerable, he said. If the alarm is triggered between midnight and 6 a.m., the system sends a code that translates to home invasion in progress. In Chicago, that is a Priority 1 dispatch. It assumes the residents are hostages. It brings the SWAT team. Do it, I said. But Gideon Silas warned if you do this and no one is actually home, the police will not be happy. It is a massive deployment of resources. I looked him in the eye. Who says no one is home? I asked. My legal residence is here. My furniture is here. My toothbrush is in the bathroom. As far as the police are concerned, this is my domicile. If I happen to be on a trip when they break in, that is fortunate for me, but it doesn't change the nature of the threat. They don't know I am not here. They are breaking in with the intent to confront a confused old man. That is a home invasion, Silas. The fact that the victim is absent is a technicality. Silas stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. He typed the code into the black box. It is done, he said. Priority 1. Home invasion protocol. If they breach that door after midnight, the cavalry is coming. We finished the installation in the study. I had Silas install a high-gain audio microphone behind the radiator grill. I wanted to hear them. I wanted to hear their greed. I wanted to hear them arguing over who got to keep the silver. I wanted the audio for the court case. A video shows action, but audio shows intent. Audio proves malice. When Silas was finished, he handed me a tablet. It showed a map of the apartment. Every room was a zone. Every zone was green. It is live, he said. You have total control from your phone. You can lock the doors. You can kill the lights. You can even speak through the hidden speakers if you want to play the voice of God. I won't speak, I said. I will just watch. I paid Silas in cash. He packed up his tools. He paused at the door. Whoever you are doing this to, he said, they must have really pissed you off. They broke the contract, I said. Silas nodded. He didn't need to know more. He left. I stood alone in the apartment. It felt different now. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a machine. It hummed with invisible energy. The air felt charged. It was a fortress disguised as a ruin. I tested the system. I walked to the front door. I unlocked it with my phone. The bolt slid back silently. I stepped into the hall. I locked it. The bolt slid home. I walked down the hall to the elevator. I waited a minute. Then I walked back. I took out my old brass key, the duplicate of the one Rachel had. I inserted it into the lock. It turned smoothly. The door opened. I stepped inside. I counted. 1, 2, 3. Nothing happened. No siren. No beep. Just silence. I looked at my phone. A notification had appeared on the screen. Unauthorized entry. Mechanical override. Timer active, 27 seconds remaining. I waited. 20 seconds. 10 seconds. 5 seconds. At 0, the notification changed. Silent alarm triggered. Protocol home invasion. Dispatching authorities. I disarmed it immediately with my thumbprint before the signal actually went out to the station. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It worked. It was perfect. It was lethal. The silence of the alarm was the most terrifying part. When a burglar hears a siren, they run. They panic. They flee. But when they hear nothing, they get confident. They think they have bypassed the security. They take their time. They go deeper into the house. They start looking for the heavy things. They start making noise. And while they are feeling smart, while they are laughing at the old man's lack of security, the police are silently surrounding the building. They are cutting off the exits. They are coming up the stairs. It was a trap designed not to repel, but to capture. It was a trap designed to maximize the consequences. I did one last sweep of the apartment. I checked the camera angles on my phone. The view from the living room was perfect. It covered the safe, the hallway, and the front door. The view from the study covered the desk where I had left a few dummy financial documents, old bank statements, with blacked-out numbers that looked important, but were meaningless. I placed a single envelope on the kitchen counter. It was addressed to Dad. It was sealed. Inside, I had put a blank piece of paper. It was a prop. I knew Rachel. She wouldn't be able to resist opening a sealed letter, and when she did, she would leave her fingerprints on it. She would prove she had been there snooping, hunting. I walked to the door. I looked back at the empty living room. I imagined Rachel standing there with her architect talking about knocking down walls. I imagined Travis standing there looking for money to pay his gambling debts. I felt a strange sense of pity for them. They were walking into a buzzsaw, and they were doing it with their eyes wide open, blinded by their own entitlement. I stepped out. I locked the door. I tested the handle. It was solid. I went down to the lobby. I smiled at the doorman. "Have a good trip, Mr. Cross," he said. "Florida, right?" "That is right," I said. "A long vacation. I need the sun." "Don't we all?" he said. I walked across the street to my new building. I went up to the penthouse. I sat down at my command center. The trap was built. The technology was primed. Now I just needed to deliver the invitation. I needed to let them know the coast was clear. I needed to tell the lie that would bring them running. I picked up my phone. I dialed Rachel's number. I cleared my throat. I pitched my voice to sound a little weaker, a little more tired than usual. I summoned the old man they thought I was. It was time to initiate the final phase. It was time to give them exactly what they wanted, so I could take everything they had. I sat in the high-backed leather chair of the penthouse, the city of Chicago sprawling out beneath me like a circuit board. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long, bruised shadows across the water of Lake Michigan. I had a glass of water on the coaster and my phone in my hand. It was time for the performance of a lifetime. I needed to become the man they wanted me to be. I needed to become the confused, vulnerable, lonely old man who was shuffling off to Florida to die in the sun. I adjusted the collar of my shirt. It was a linen button-down, a vacation shirt. I had bought a cheap straw hat and placed it on the table behind me, just visible in the frame of the video call. It was a prop, a cliché. But people like Rachel operated on clichés. They didn't see people. They seen archetypes. To her, I was simply the obstacle. And now I was the obstacle on vacation. I dialed her number. It rang 3 times. I watched her face appear on the screen. She was in her car. I could see the headrest. She was wearing sunglasses, which she pushed up onto her head when she saw who it was. She looked annoyed. She always looked annoyed when I called, as if my existence was an interruption to her very important life of spending money she didn't have. "Hi, Gideon," she said. Her voice was tight. "What is it?" "We are busy." I pitched my voice higher. I added a slight tremor to it. I hesitated before speaking, mimicking the cognitive delay she was so eager to diagnose me with. "Rachel," I said, "I just wanted to let you know. I am at the airport. My flight leaves in an hour." Her expression changed instantly. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a sharp, predatory alertness. She pulled the car over. I saw the background stop moving. She wanted to give this her full attention. "You are at the airport?" she asked. "You are really going?" "Yes," I said. I sighed, a long, weary sound. "You and Travis were right. I need a break. The city is too cold. My bones hurt. I booked a place in Boca Raton. A nice facility, assisted living just for a month to try it out. They have doctors there. They have people to watch me. I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. She was trying not to smile. She was trying not to scream with joy. This was her victory. She had bullied the old man out of his fortress. "That is wonderful, Gideon," she said. Her voice dripped with fake syrup. "It is the best thing for you. You will love the heat. You will make friends. Don't worry about a thing here. We will check on the apartment." "No," I said quickly. I injected a note of panic into my voice. "No, don't go to the apartment." "Why not?" she asked. Her eyes narrowed. Suspicion. She was naturally suspicious because she was naturally dishonest. I left it a mess," I stammered. "I didn't do the dishes. I didn't make the bed. I don't want you to see it like that. It is embarrassing. Just leave it." I locked the deadbolt. I double-locked it. "No one can get in." Rachel smiled. It was a soothing, patronizing smile. "Gideon, we are family. We don't care about a few dirty dishes. We just want to make sure the pipes don't freeze. We will just pop in and check." I let out a breath of agitation. I rubbed my forehead, covering my eyes for a moment, as if I were overwhelmed. "It is not just the dishes, Rachel," I whispered. I leaned closer to the phone camera. I lowered my voice, forcing her to lean in on her end. "What is it?" she asked. "It is the safe," I said. The air in her car seemed to freeze. I had said the magic word. The safe. The holy grail of their greed. "What about the safe?" she asked. She tried to sound casual, but she failed. Her eyes were locked on mine. I think I left it unlocked," I said. "I was looking for some papers this morning. The insurance policies. The bonds. The deed to the apartment. I was trying to organize things before I left. My mind. It is so foggy lately. I can't remember if I spun the dial." I watched her pupils dilate. I was feeding her the exact narrative she had constructed. I was the senile old fool who left his fortune unguarded. "The deed is in the safe," she asked. "And bonds?" "Yes," I said. "Bearer bonds, from the 80s. And the cash. I keep an emergency fund there. About 50,000. I don't trust banks anymore. You know that. $50,000 cash. Bearer bonds. The deed." I had just laid out a buffet of untraceable wealth. I saw her throat work as she swallowed. She was doing the math. She was calculating how fast she could get to the Gold Coast. "Gideon," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed excitement. "You can't leave the safe unlocked. That is dangerous. If someone breaks in—" "I know," I said. I sounded on the verge of tears. "I am so worried. But I am already at the gate. I can't go back. I will miss my flight. I need you to promise me you won't go in there. I don't want you to see how much money I have hoarding. It is not polite." I promise, she lied. She lied so easily it was almost impressive. "We won't touch a thing. You just go to Florida. Relax. Have a margarita. We will handle everything." I let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you, Rachel. You are a good girl. Tell Travis I love him. Tell him the combination is his birthday. If anything happens to me." I saw her freeze. The combination is his birthday. I had just given her the key to the kingdom. Or so she thought. In reality, the combination was not his birthday. It was the date I caught my first embezzler. But she didn't know that. She would try his birthday. She would try her birthday. She would try their anniversary. She would stand in front of that safe for hours, spinning that dial, sweating, panicking, while the silent alarm counted down the seconds to her arrest. "Okay, Dad," she said. She called me Dad. She only called me Dad when she thought she was getting paid. "Have a safe flight. Call us when you land." "I will," I said. "Goodbye." I hung up the phone. I sat back in the chair. The performance was over. I felt a wave of exhaustion, but it was a good exhaustion. It was the feeling of a craftsman who has just placed the final stone in an archway. It held. I picked up the iPad. I switched the view to the hidden camera in the living room across the street. The apartment was silent. The dust motes were still dancing in the shafts of afternoon light. The painting of the ship on the wall looked innocent. Behind it lay the safe. Inside the safe lay the tax returns and the costume jewelry. It was a cruel trick, perhaps. Some might say it was entrapment. But entrapment requires inducing someone to commit a crime they would not otherwise commit. I had not induced her. I had simply removed the perceived consequences. I had shown her an open door. Her own character walked her through it. I watched the screen. I wondered how long it would take. She was in her car. She was probably calling Travis right now. He is gone, she would say. He is at the airport. He left the safe open. There is cash. There are bonds. We have to go now. Travis would hesitate. He always hesitated. Are you sure he would ask? I am sure she would scream at him. He told me. He is senile, Travis. He admitted it. He gave me the combination. This is it. This is how we pay off the loan sharks. This is how we save the house. They wouldn't wait for nightfall. They were too desperate. But they wouldn't come immediately either. They would wait for the cover of darkness just to be safe. They would wait until the doorman changed shifts at midnight because the night guy was lazy and didn't ask questions. I checked the time. It was 4 p.m. I had 8 hours. I stood up and stretched. I walked to the kitchenette of the penthouse. I opened a bottle of red wine. It was a bottle I had been saving for a special occasion. Tonight was the occasion. Tonight was the audit. I poured a glass and walked back to the window. I looked at the building across the street. It looked like a tombstone against the darkening sky. I thought about the man I used to be, the father who taught Travis to play baseball, the husband who bought Catherine that mink coat. That man was gone. He had died slowly, cut by cut, lie by lie over the last 5 years. The man who remained was colder, harder. He was a man who believed in accountability. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Rachel. Have a safe flight. We love you, I stared at the words. We love you. It was the ultimate insult. They didn't love me. They loved what I could provide. They loved the idea of my death. I didn't reply. I turned off my phone. I didn't want any distractions. I sat down in front of the monitors. I adjusted the brightness. I checked the audio feed. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the empty apartment. I could hear the distant sound of traffic from the street below. The stage was set. The actors were learning their lines. And the audience of one was waiting. I took a sip of wine. It was rich, complex, with a finish of oak and iron. Come on, Rachel, I whispered to the screen. Don't disappoint me. Be exactly who I know you are. The sun went down. The city lights came up. The apartment across the street turned into a box of shadows. At 7 o'clock, nothing happened. At 9 o'clock, nothing happened. At 11 o'clock, I saw a car pull up to the curb on the street below. I raised my binoculars. It was a black SUV, Travis's car. They sat there for a long time. I could see the glow of their phones illuminating their faces. They were arguing, or planning, or hesitating. Finally, the doors opened. 2 figures stepped out. They were wearing dark clothes. They were carrying a large duffel bag. It was the kind of bag you bring when you plan to carry out a lot of heavy things, like silver, like coats, like a heavy metal box full of cash. They walked toward the entrance of my building. They didn't use the main door. They went around the side to the service entrance. They still had the key. My heart rate remained steady. My hands were dry. I watched them disappear into the building. I put down the binoculars. I looked at the iPad. A moment later, the notification appeared on the screen. Motion detected service hallway. They were in. I leaned forward. I took another sip of wine. "Welcome home, children," I said. The sensors in the hallway lit up. They were moving toward the apartment door. I switched the camera view to the living room. The door handle jiggled. The lock turned. The door swung open. Rachel stepped in first. She wasn't looking for a light switch. She had a flashlight in her hand. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the empty room. She froze. Travis stepped in behind her. He closed the door. He locked it. I watched them. They stood in the foyer of the home where Travis had grown up, but they didn't look like family. They looked like invaders. Rachel shined the light on the wall where the painting hung. "The ship at sea." "There it is," she whispered. The microphone picked it up clearly. She pointed the light at the painting. "Get it down," she said to Travis. Travis moved forward. He reached for the painting. I checked the alarm status on my phone. System armed, silent mode. The countdown had begun. I watched my son reach for the painting that hid the empty safe, and I felt a profound, terrible sadness. But I did not reach for the disarm button. I let him touch the frame. And then I waited for the police. The digital clock on the microwave in my new kitchenette glowed a harsh green. 200 hours. 2 in the morning. The witching hour for the desperate and the damned. I sat in the darkness of the penthouse, the leather of the chair cool against my back, a glass of Pinot Noir breathing on the side table. I wasn't drinking it anymore. I was just watching the liquid settle, much like the fate of my family, across the street. I raised the binoculars to my eyes, though I hardly needed them. The feed on the large monitor in front of me was broadcasting in high-definition night vision. The living room of my old apartment was bathed in a ghostly green and gray light. To anyone passing by on the street below the 12th floor windows would have looked dark, the curtains drawn tight. But inside it was a hive of criminal activity. Rachel and Travis had been inside for 10 minutes. They hadn't come alone. That was the variable that turned this from a family dispute into a felony conspiracy. Following them like a shadow was a man I didn't recognize. He was short, thick-set, wearing a utility vest and carrying a heavy canvas bag that clanked when he set it down on my hardwood floors. He wasn't a friend. He wasn't a mover. He was a professional safecracker. I watched on the screen as Rachel directed him toward the wall safe hidden behind the painting of the ship. Travis had already taken the painting down. It was leaning against the sofa, discarded like trash. My son stood in the center of the room, wringing his hands, his head swiveling toward the front door every few seconds. He was terrified. Good. Fear is the only rational response to committing a crime, and at least he had enough sense left to be afraid. Rachel, however, was fearless. She was pacing back and forth in front of the safe, gesturing wildly at the man with the tools. I turned up the volume on the audio feed. The directional microphone behind the radiator caught her voice with crystal clarity. "How long is this going to take?" she hissed. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the static. "You said 5 minutes. It has been 10. We don't have all night." The safecracker didn't look up. He was attaching a magnetic drill press to the face of my vintage wall safe. He worked with a slow, methodical rhythm that clearly infuriated her. "Lady, you want it open or you want it butchered?" The man grunted. "This is a formidable mechanism. Old-school steel, manganese plate. If I trigger the glass relocker, this thing seals up forever, and you will need a plasma cutter to get inside. Do you want to wake up the whole building with a torch? Or do you want me to finesse it?" Rachel crossed her arms. "Just get it done." The old man said the combination was a birthday, but the dial feels stiff. He probably broke it with his shaking hands. Just drill it. I took a sip of wine. She had tried the birthday. I knew she would. She had probably spent the first 5 minutes spinning that dial to Travis's birth date, then her own, then their anniversary. When it didn't open, she didn't stop. She didn't think maybe Gideon isn't senile. She thought Gideon broke the lock. Her arrogance was her blindfold. Travis stepped into the frame. He looked pale even in the green night vision. "Rachel," he whispered, "we shouldn't be drilling. This is loud. What if the neighbors hear? What if the doorman comes up?" "The doorman is asleep," Rachel snapped at him. "I gave him $50 last week. He won't move unless the building is on fire. And the neighbors, they are all deaf geriatrics. Stop being such a coward, Travis. Do you want to lose the house? Do you want those guys to break your legs? Because that is the alternative. We need what is in that box." I leaned forward in my chair. Those guys. So it was confirmed. Travis wasn't just in debt to a bank. He was in debt to loan sharks. That explained the physical fear. That explained why a schoolteacher was standing in his father's living room at 2 a.m, watching a criminal drill a safe. He was cornered. I felt a pang of pity, sharp and brief. I had failed him. I had protected him too much, and in doing so, I had left him soft and vulnerable to predators. Rachel was a predator. The loan sharks were predators, and Travis was just the meat. But the pity vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the cold resolve of the auditor. He had made his choice. He had chosen the drill over the truth. I looked at the alarm status on my phone screen. Silent alarm active. Zone 2 living room. Status intrusion confirmed. Timer elapsed. The signal had already gone out. The police dispatch computer had received a priority 1 alert, silent panic. 12th floor. 3 perpetrators. Possible weapons. Because I had registered the system as occupied vulnerable, the dispatchers wouldn't be calling to check if it was a false alarm. They would be rolling units. They would be treating this as a hostage situation or a burglary in progress with the resident present. I checked the time. 2:12 a.m. The response time for a priority 1 call in the Gold Coast was typically under 6 minutes. They were already on their way. On the screen, the drill whirred to life. It was a low, grinding sound. The safecracker applied pressure. Metal shrieked against metal. "There," the man said. "I am through the hard plate. Now I just need to scope the tumblers." He inserted a fiber optic scope into the hole he had drilled. He put his eye to the eyepiece. He began to turn the dial slowly, watching the internal mechanism align. Rachel was practically vibrating with greed. She stood right over his shoulder. "Can you see it? Is it full? Is the cash there?" "I can't see inside the box yet, lady," the man said. "I am just opening the door. Back off. You are breathing on my neck." Travis walked over to the window directly across from where I sat. He peered out through the crack in the curtains. He looked right at me, though he couldn't see me. He looked at the dark windows of the Sovereign Tower. He looked nervous. He looked like a man waiting for the executioner. He didn't know the executioner was his father. I lowered the binoculars. I picked up my phone. I opened the police scanner app. I wanted to hear the coordination. Dispatch to all units. 1021 in progress at 1400 Lakeshore Drive. Silent holdup alarm. Multiple sensors tripped. Audio surveillance indicates drilling tools. Suspects inside. Units 4 Alpha and 4 Bravo responding. ETA 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I looked back at the screen. The safecracker smiled. "Gotcha," he muttered. He spun the dial one last time. There was a heavy mechanical clunk. The handle released. Rachel gasped. "Open it!" she screamed, forgetting to whisper. The man pulled the heavy steel door open. The safe was dark inside. Rachel shoved the man aside and shined her flashlight into the cavity. "It is deep," she said. Her voice shook. "It is huge." She reached in. She pulled out the stack of papers I had left. The old tax returns from 1995. "What is this?" she asked, flipping through them frantically. "Tax papers." "Where are the bonds?" Gideon said. "There were bonds. Keep looking." Travis yelled from the window. He ran over. "Check the back." Rachel threw the papers on the floor. She reached in again. She pulled out the small metal cash box I had placed there. It rattled. "This is it," she said. "This has to be it." The cash, the jewelry. She set the box on the coffee table. It was locked with a simple latch. She didn't wait for the locksmith. She grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the mantel, one of the few things I had left behind, and smashed the latch. The lid popped open. Rachel reached in and pulled out a handful of what looked like diamonds and rubies. They glittered in the flashlight beam. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Look at this, Travis. Look at the size of these. This is millions. This is absolute millions." She held up a necklace made of glass paste and rhinestone. It was a prop Catherine had worn when she played a duchess in a community theater production of The Importance of Being Earnest. It was worth perhaps $15 at a vintage shop. Travis stared at it, mesmerized. "We are saved," he whispered. "We are actually saved." I watched them celebrate. I watched them hug. I watched Rachel shove the fake jewels into her pockets, laughing a manic, high-pitched laugh. They were so distracted by their victory, so drunk on the illusion of wealth, that they didn't hear what I heard. They didn't hear the sirens cut abruptly into silence as the cruisers approached the building to maintain the element of surprise. They didn't hear the heavy boots hitting the lobby floor 12 stories down. They didn't hear the elevator start to rise. The safecracker heard something, though. He stopped packing his drill. He cocked his head. "Quiet," he said. Rachel ignored him. She was digging through the safe again, looking for the deed. "I said quiet," the man barked. The room fell silent. And then, through the audio feed, I heard it. The heavy metallic sound of the service elevator arriving on the 12th floor. The ding of the bell. Travis's eyes went wide. "Who is that?" he whispered. The safecracker didn't answer. He grabbed his bag. He ran for the kitchen looking for a back exit. But there was no back exit. I lived on the 12th floor. The fire escape was on the outside and the window was painted shut. I had checked it myself. Rachel stood frozen, the fake diamonds in her hands. The front door exploded. It wasn't a knock. It was a battering ram. The smart lock I had installed shattered under the force of the police entry tool. The door flew open, crashing against the wall with a violence that shook the camera. "Police, get down, get on the ground." Now, the room was suddenly flooded with blinding tactical lights. 4 officers in SWAT gear swarmed into the living room, rifles raised. Travis screamed and dropped to his knees, his hands in the air. The safecracker dove behind the sofa, but an officer was on him in a second, dragging him out by his collar. Rachel just stood there. She held the costume jewelry to her chest, blinking into the lights like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. "Drop it!" The lead officer screamed. "Drop the weapon!" He thought the heavy candlestick she was still holding was a weapon. Rachel dropped it. It clattered to the floor. She dropped the jewels. They scattered across the hardwood like confetti. "I live here," she shrieked. Her voice was high and thin with terror. "I live here. This is my father's house. I have a key. Get on the ground." The officer didn't care about her family tree. He cared about securing the scene. He kicked her legs out from under her. She hit the floor hard. He put a knee in her back and cuffed her hands behind her. "I have a key," she sobbed into the rug. Call Gideon Cross. He will tell you I sat in the penthouse sipping my wine." I watched my daughter-in-law being handcuffed in the wreckage of my living room. I watched my son being pressed against the wall, frisked for weapons. I watched the safecracker being dragged out in irons. The lead officer picked up his radio. "Dispatch, we have the premises secured. 3 suspects in custody. 1 male white 35, 1 female white 32, 1 male unknown 50. We found them drilling a safe. Looks like a professional job interrupted. No sign of the resident." The radio crackled back. "Copy that. We are contacting the owner of record now to verify occupancy status. Stand by." My phone rang. It wasn't Rachel. It wasn't Travis. It was the Chicago Police Department. I looked at the caller ID. I took a deep breath. I cleared my throat. I let it ring twice, then I answered. "Hello," I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice of a man waking up in a warm bed in Florida, confused by a late-night call. "Mr. Cross," the dispatcher asked. "This is Sergeant Miller with the Chicago Police. We have had an incident at your residence on Lakeshore Drive. Are you currently at home?" "No," I said. "I am in Boca Raton. I arrived this evening." "Why, what has happened? Is the apartment on fire?" "No, sir," the sergeant said. "But your silent alarm was triggered. Our officers are on the scene. They have detained 3 individuals inside your apartment. A man and a woman claiming to be your son and daughter-in-law, and a 3rd male with burglary tools." I let out a gasp, a perfectly timed, shocked gasp. "My son?" I asked. "That is impossible. My son knows I am away. He knows he is not allowed in the apartment. I took his key away months ago. He has no reason to be there. And a 3rd man, I don't know any 3rd man." The sergeant paused. "Sir, the female suspect is screaming that she has permission. She says you told her to come over." "She is lying," I said firmly. My voice hardened. "Sergeant, listen to me carefully. I have been having trouble with them. They have been aggressive. They have been trying to get money from me. If they are there and they have a man with tools, oh my God." "Are they trying to break into my safe?" "Yes, sir," the sergeant said. "The safe has been drilled. I want to press charges," I said. My voice was cold as ice. "I want them arrested. That is my home. Those are my things. I do not have anyone authorized to be there. If they broke in, they are criminals. Treat them as such." "Understood, Mr. Cross," the sergeant said. "We will transport them to the station. We will need you to come in to give a statement when you return." "I will fly back first thing in the morning," I said. "Keep them locked up, Sergeant. I don't feel safe knowing they are on the loose." "I will do my best, sir." The line went dead. I looked back at the monitor. The police were hauling them out. Rachel was still screaming my name. Travis was weeping, his head hanging low. I finished my wine. I closed the iPad. The stakeout was over. The audit was complete. The discrepancies had been identified, and the assets had been seized. I stood up and walked to the bedroom of the penthouse. I was going to sleep well tonight. I had a flight to catch in the morning. Not from Florida, but from the airport of my own making. I had to go down to the station and play the part of the heartbroken father, and I was going to win an Oscar. The celebration inside my apartment was cut short not by a whimper, but by a thunderclap. From my vantage point in the penthouse across the street, I watched the heavy oak door of Unit 12B splinter inward. It was a beautiful, violent disintegration of privacy. The smart lock I had installed, a piece of technology designed to look like a vintage brass antique, held for exactly 1 microsecond before the battering ram of the Chicago Police Department's tactical entry team turned the frame into kindling. The noise must have been deafening inside the room, a concussive boom that rattled the teeth, but from my silent perch behind the double-paned glass of the Sovereign Tower, it was like watching a silent film of a demolition. The effect on the 3 people inside was instantaneous and absolute. Travis, who had been holding a string of glass pearls up to the light, dropped them. They didn't just fall from his hands. His entire body seemed to lose its structural integrity. He collapsed downward, his knees hitting the hardwood floor with a force that I imagined would bruise the bone. He didn't run, he didn't fight. He simply curled in on himself, a pill bug reacting to a sudden blinding light. It was the reaction of a man who had been waiting for the hammer to drop his entire life and was relieved in a sick way that the waiting was finally over. The safecracker, the professional in the utility vest, was the only one with survival instincts. The moment the door frame cracked, before the wood even hit the floor, he was moving. He dove behind the heavy leather sofa, scrambling for cover, his hands already coming up to protect his head. He knew what was coming. He knew that when a door explodes like that, the men coming through it are not there to ask questions. They are there to neutralize threats. He was making himself small. He was making himself surrender before the first boot crossed the threshold. But Rachel was a study in frozen arrogance. She did not drop to the floor. She did not raise her hands. She stood in the center of the room, clutching the metal cash box to her chest, like a shield staring at the gaping hole where the door used to be. She was blinded by the tactical lights attached to the rifles of the entry team. 4 beams of high-intensity white light cut through the gloom, converging on her. They turned her into a ghost, a pale figure caught in the harsh glare of reality. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing, her brain unable to process the shift from victorious heiress to suspect number 1. "Get down!" The command came through the audio feed on my iPad, distorted by the volume, but unmistakable in its authority. "Police, get on the ground, now!" The lead officer, a giant of a man in heavy body armor, stormed into the room. He moved with the terrifying speed of trained aggression. He bypassed Travis, who was already sobbing, into the rug. He bypassed the sofa. He went straight for the person standing upright. He went straight for Rachel. "Drop the box. Show me your hands." Rachel didn't drop the box. She clutched it tighter. In her delusional mind, that box was her salvation. It was the money for the loan sharks. It was the down payment on her new life. To drop it was to admit defeat. "I live here," she shrieked. The microphone peaked, the audio cracking with the sheer volume of her hysteria. "I live here. You can't do this. This is my father's house." The officer didn't care about her lineage. He cared about the metal object in her hands that could, in the darkness and chaos, be mistaken for a weapon. He didn't argue. He didn't ask for ID. He closed the distance in 2 strides. He swept her legs out from under her with a practiced fluid motion. Rachel hit the floor hard. The cash box flew from her hands, skidding across the polished wood, spilling the worthless costume jewelry in a glittering arc. The officer was on her back instantly, his knee pressing into her spine, pinning her to the ground. He grabbed her right wrist and wrenched it behind her back, then the left. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was a sharp, mechanical zip click that signaled the end of her freedom. "You are hurting me," Rachel screamed into the floorboards. Her face was pressed against the wood, her cheek squashed, her dignity erased. "Get off me! Do you know who I am? I am Rachel Cross. I have keys. Call Gideon. Call him right now." The officer ignored her. He was shouting codes into his shoulder radio, clearing the room. Clear left. Clear right. Suspect 1 secured. 2 other officers had swarmed Travis. They didn't need to tackle him. He was already prostrate, his hands clasped behind his head, sobbing loudly. "Don't shoot," he blubbered. "Please don't shoot. I didn't do anything. I just wanted the papers. Please." They cuffed him anyway. They hauled him up by his armpits and shoved him against the wall, frisking him with rough, efficient pats. One officer pulled Travis's wallet from his pocket and threw it on the floor. Then his phone. Then the keys, my keys that he had used to enter the service door. They clattered next to the fake diamonds. The 4th officer dragged the safecracker out from behind the sofa. The man was cooperative. He knew the drill. He walked with his head down, his hands already behind his back, waiting for the steel bracelets. He looked bored. He looked like a man calculating his bail. He looked at Rachel, who was still thrashing on the floor, and shook his head. "Shut up, lady," the safecracker muttered. "You are making it worse." "I am not a criminal," Rachel yelled, twisting her neck to glare up at the officer on top of her. "I have permission. The owner is my father-in-law. He is senile. He forgot to tell you." "Check the list. Check the owner's list. Ma'am, stop resisting," the officer barked. He pulled her up to her knees, then to her feet. She was disheveled. Her expensive coat was covered in dust from the floor. Her hair was wild. She looked deranged. "Look at this," she screamed, nodding her head toward the spilled jewelry. "Those are my family heirlooms. You are damaging them." The officer glanced at the pile of glass and plastic. He kicked a rhinestone necklace aside with his boot to clear a path. It slid across the floor light as a feather. He knew cheap junk when he saw it. He looked back at Rachel with a look of utter contempt. "You are under arrest for burglary, breaking and entering, and possession of burglary tools," the officer recited. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." "I will not be silent," Rachel spat. "This is a mistake. My father-in-law is in Florida. He told us to come here. He told us to open the safe." The officer pushed her toward the door, the broken, splintered door that stood as a testament to their crime. "Move," I watched from my tower. I took a slow sip of the wine. It tasted complex, layered with notes of dark fruit and justice. I watched my son being marched out of the home he grew up in. He looked small. He looked broken. He looked back one last time at the empty wall safe, at the dark hole where he thought his salvation lay. There was no money. There were no bonds. There was only a hole in the wall and a pair of handcuffs on his wrists. The procession moved into the hallway. The camera angle shifted. I switched to the hallway feed. I saw the neighbors poking their heads out of their doors. Mrs. Gable from 12A in her silk robe clutching her poodle. Mr. Henderson from 12C, staring with Fried's wide eyes. Rachel saw them. She saw her audience. "Tell them," she shouted at Mrs. Gable. "Tell them who I am. You see me here all the time. Tell them I am the daughter-in-law." Mrs. Gable looked at the police. She looked at the broken door. She looked at the handcuffs. Then she looked at Rachel and slowly closed her door. The click of her lock was audible even over the commotion. That was the social verdict. In the Gold Coast, you can be eccentric, you can be rude, but you cannot be the subject of a police raid. Rachel was social poison now. The officers herded them into the elevator. I switched my view to the lobby camera. The doorman, the one Rachel had bribed, was standing by the desk looking terrified. The police had likely woken him up with a gun in his face to get access to the elevators. He wasn't going to vouch for her. He was going to save his own job. I watched them being led out of the building. The flashing blue lights of the police cruisers strobed against the limestone facade, painting the street in a chaotic rhythm of light and shadow. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. Late-night dog walkers, drivers slowing down to gawk. Rachel was shoved into the back of a squad car. She had to duck her head to avoid hitting the roof. It was an undignified end to her high society aspirations. Travis was placed in a separate car. He slumped against the window, his forehead resting on the glass, defeated. The safecracker went into a third vehicle. He looked like he was just catching a cab to work. The sergeant remained on the sidewalk, talking to the doorman, taking notes. He pointed up at my window. The doorman nodded vigorously. My phone rang again. It was the sergeant. "Mr. Cross," he said. "We have transported the suspects. We secured the scene. We found significant damage to the entry door and the interior wall safe. It appears they were using an industrial drill." Did they take anything?" I asked, keeping the tremor of the shocked old man in my voice. The sergeant paused. Well, sir, there was a metal box. It was open. There is a large amount of jewelry scattered on the floor. It looks valuable. We are bagging it as evidence. I let out a sigh. Oh dear, my wife's theater props. She loved those things. They aren't worth $5, Sergeant, but they have sentimental value. The sergeant was silent for a moment. Props, sir, costume jewelry, I said. Glass and paste. I keep the real things in the bank. I'm not foolish enough to leave diamonds in a wall safe, Sergeant. I heard a small stifled sound on the other end of the line. It might have been a chuckle. I see, the sergeant said. Well, the female suspect seemed very convinced they were real. She was quite animated about it. I am sure she was, I said. She has always had an active imagination. We will need you to come down to the station tomorrow to sign the formal complaint, the sergeant said, and we will need an inventory of any actual damages. I will be there, I said. Thank you, Sergeant. Thank you for protecting my home. It is our job, sir. Try to get some sleep. I hung up. I looked down at the street. The cruisers were pulling away, their sirens silent now, just the lights cutting through the Chicago night. They were taking my family to a holding cell. They were taking them to a place with no luxury, no pretense, and no escape. I turned away from the window. I walked back to the kitchenette and rinsed my wineglass. I dried it carefully and put it back in the cabinet. The raid was over. The physical threat was neutralized, but the audit was not complete. Now came the paperwork phase. Now came the legal dismantling. Now came the cold, hard light of the courtroom. I walked to the bedroom of the penthouse. I sat on the edge of the bed. I felt a deep, weary ache in my bones. It wasn't physical fatigue. It was the weight of the tragedy. I had just orchestrated the arrest of my own son. I had just sent him to jail. A weaker man might have cried. A weaker man might have called the station and dropped the charges. But I was not a weak man. I was a man who knew that actions have consequences. I knew that if I saved him now, I would only be teaching him that he could steal from me with impunity. I would be teaching him that my love was a weakness he could exploit. I lay back on the pillows. I stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow I would have to put on my suit. I would have to walk into that police station. I would have to look at their faces through the glass of an interrogation room. And I would have to deliver the final blow. I would have to tell them the truth about the apartment. I would have to tell them that they hadn't just broken into their father's home. They had broken into a corporate asset. And corporations do not have feelings. Corporations do not have mercy. I closed my eyes. I slept the sleep of the just, the sleep of the auditor who has balanced the books no matter how red the ink. My phone rang a second time just as the last police cruiser was peeling away from the curb 12 stories below. The red and blue lights were still dancing off the limestone facade of the building, a silent disco of consequences. I let the phone ring 3 times. A man in Florida woken from a deep sleep for the second time in an hour would be slow. He would be groggy. He would be terrified. I picked up the device. I cleared my throat, pitching my voice into a register of shaky anxiety that I hadn't felt in 40 years. "Hello," I said. "Sergeant, is that you?" It wasn't the sergeant this time. It was a detective. His voice was rougher, cynical, the voice of a man who had seen too many domestic disputes turn bloody. "Mr. Cross, this is Detective Kowalski. I am taking over the scene here. I need to verify a few things before we transport these individuals to central booking. They are making a lot of noise in the back of my car, sir." I walked to the window of the penthouse. I looked down. I could see the silhouette of the detective standing on the sidewalk, phone pressed to his ear. "What kind of noise?" I asked. "The female suspect, the one identified as Rachel Cross, she is insisting that she has a standing invitation. She claims you gave her the combination to the safe over the phone this afternoon. She says this is a misunderstanding. She says she is here to check on the pipes. I let out a long, shuddering breath. It was a masterpiece of acting. Detective, I said, my voice trembling. I am 72 years old. I worked as a forensic auditor for 40 years. I do not give out safe combinations over the phone. I do not invite people to come over at 2 in the morning with industrial drills. The detective grunted. I figured as much. But she has a key, Mr. Cross. It fits the lock. Or what is left of the lock. She stole it, I said. The lie tasted sweet, because in a moral sense it was the absolute truth. She had stolen my peace. She had stolen my trust. The physical key was just a totem of that theft. I asked for that key back months ago. She refused to return it. She told me she lost it. If she used it tonight, she used a stolen instrument to facilitate a felony. I heard the scratch of a pen on paper. The detective was writing this down. Stolen key. Good. That added a layer of premeditation. And the male suspect, the detective continued. Travis Cross. He claims to be your son. He says he is a school teacher. He is crying pretty hard, sir. He says he just wanted to find some papers. I closed my eyes. I pictured Travis. The boy who used to bring me his report cards with shaking hands, afraid a B- would disappoint me. He never understood that I didn't care about the grade. I cared about the effort. Tonight, his effort was criminal. Mr. Cross, the detective pressed. Is he your son? I looked at the empty apartment across the street. I looked at the hole in the wall where the safe used to be. Detective, listened to me closely. Biologically, that man may share my DNA. But the man who breaks into a senior citizen's home in the middle of the night, who brings a safecracker to drill into a wall, who terrorizes a neighborhood, that man is a stranger to me. I have no son who would do that. I have no children authorized to enter my home at 2 a.m. The only people who enter a home at that hour with those tools are predators. There was a silence on the line. The detective was processing the coldness of the statement. He was realizing that there would be no family reconciliation at the station. There would be no dropped charges. I understand, sir, the detective said finally. His tone had shifted. It was more respectful now. And the third man, the one with the drill, I have never heard of him, I said. But detective, if they brought a professional, if they brought heavy equipment, they didn't come to check the pipes. They came to loot the place. They thought I was gone. They thought I was helpless. They certainly did, the detective agreed. Well, Mr. Cross, you can rest easy. They aren't looting anything tonight except a bologna sandwich in the holding cell. We are charging them with home invasion burglary, possession of burglary tools, and criminal damage to property. Home invasion, I repeated. That sounds serious. It is a Class X felony in Illinois, sir, the detective said. Mandatory minimum of 6 years if convicted, especially since they triggered a priority alarm. The system registered the dwelling as occupied. Technically, by entering with the intent to commit a theft while the dwelling was secured, they crossed a very serious line. 6 years. The number hung in the air. 6 years was a long time. It was enough time to miss birthdays. It was enough time to lose a teaching license. It was enough time to lose a marriage. Do you want to speak to them? The detective asked. I can put them on the line. Maybe hearing your voice? No, I said sharply. The refusal was instinctive. I did not want to hear their pleading. I did not want to hear Rachel's screeching justifications or Travis's weeping. If I heard them, I might remember the good years. I might remember the Christmas mornings. And I couldn't afford to remember. I needed to remain the auditor. I have nothing to say to them, detective. Anything they have to say, they can say to a judge. I will see them in court. Understood. We will need a formal statement when you return from Florida. I will book a flight tomorrow, I said. Good night, detective. Good night, Mr. Cross. I lowered the phone. My hand was shaking slightly. Not from fear, from the adrenaline crash. It was done. The verbal contract was signed. I had just disowned my family to a police officer on a recorded line. I walked back to the window. The detective was getting into his car. The street was empty again. The show was over. The audience of one was left alone in the dark. I poured the rest of the wine down the sink. I didn't want it anymore. I washed the glass. I dried it. I put it away. I went into the bathroom of the penthouse. I splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked old. The lines around my eyes were deep. My skin was pale, but my eyes were clear. They were the eyes of a man who had done what was necessary. They would call me cruel. They would call me heartless. Rachel would tell anyone who would listen that I had set them up, and she would be right. I had set them up, but I hadn't forced them to walk through the door. I hadn't forced them to hire a criminal. I hadn't forced them to try to rob me. I had simply given them the opportunity to show me who they really were. And they had shown me. They had shown me with a drill and a flashlight at 2 a.m. I walked to the bedroom. I lay down on the stiff corporate mattress. I pulled the duvet up to my chin. Tomorrow would be a busy day. I had to meet with Cole. I had to go to the police station. I had to face the wreckage of my living room. But for now, I was safe. My assets were safe. Catherine's urn was safe on the mantel in the other room. I closed my eyes. I have no children authorized to enter my home, I whispered to the empty room. It was the truth. And the truth, as I had learned over a lifetime of looking at numbers, was the only thing that set you free. The coffee at the 18th District Police Station tasted like burnt rubber and bureaucracy. I held the styrofoam cup in my hand, not to drink, but to warm my fingers. The air conditioning in the precinct was set to a temperature designed to keep people awake and uncomfortable. It was effective. I sat in interview room B. Next to me was Cole. He was wearing a navy pinstripe suit that cost more than the detective's car. He had a leather briefcase on the table in front of him. He looked like a shark swimming in a goldfish bowl. He was calm. He was ready. Across the metal table sat Rachel and Travis. They looked like the wreckage of a natural disaster. Rachel's hair was matted. Her expensive mascara had run down her cheeks in black streaks, giving her the appearance of a demented raccoon. Her coat, the one she had worn with such arrogance just 24 hours ago, was wrinkled and stained with the dust of my floorboards. Travis was worse. He was slumped in his chair, his eyes red and swollen, his hands shaking in the cuffs that were chained to the table. Detective Kowalski stood by the door, his arms crossed. He looked tired. He looked like a man who just wanted the paperwork to be over. When Rachel saw me, she didn't look down in shame. She surged forward, the chain rattling against the steel table. "Gideon!" She screamed. "Thank God! Tell them, tell this idiot detective that it was a mistake. Tell them you forgot. Tell them we have keys." I looked at her. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I looked at her with the same professional detachment I used to look at CEOs who had cooked their books. "There is no mistake, Rachel," I said. My voice was low, steady, and devoid of any warmth. "What?" she gasped. "What are you saying? You gave us permission. You called me, you said the safe was open." I leaned forward. I placed my hands on the table. "I said I was going to Florida," I corrected. "I said I was leaving the apartment empty. I did not say you could come over at 2 a.m. with a safecracker named Mick the Torch. That wasn't... We lost the key." Rachel stammered. "We needed to check the pipes. We thought there was a leak." "A leak inside a wall safe?" I asked. "That is a very specific plumbing problem." Travis made a sound. It was a whimper, Dad, please, we are in trouble, real trouble. They are talking about felonies. They are talking about prison. Just drop the charges. Please. We learned our lesson. I looked at my son. I looked at the man who had forged my signature at the bank. You haven't learned anything yet, Travis, I said. But you are about to. I nodded to Cole. Cole opened his briefcase. He didn't pull out a few papers. He pulled out a binder. It was 3 inches thick. He dropped it on the table. The sound was a heavy, dull thud that echoed in the small room. What is that? Rachel asked. Her voice trembled. This, I said, is the audit. I opened the binder to the first tab. Let's start with the access, I said. You claim you were checking on me. You claim you were a concerned daughter-in-law. I read from the first page. October 12th, 2:30 p.m. Unauthorized entry. Subject found wearing Catherine Cross's vintage mink coat. Subject claimed to be decluttering. Subject refused to return key. I turned the page. November 3rd, 10:00 a.m. Unauthorized entry while resident was at the doctor. Subject removed a silver picture frame from the mantel. Item never returned. I turned the page again. November 15th, 4:00 p.m. Unauthorized entry. Subject went through desk drawers. Financial documents disturbed. I looked up at her. Rachel's face had gone pale. I have logs of 36 separate unauthorized entries in the last 5 months, I said. I have dates. I have times. And starting from last week, I have video. Cole pulled out a tablet. He tapped the screen. He spun it around so they could see. The video played. It was the recording from the hidden camera. It showed Rachel standing in my living room with the architect. The audio was crystal clear. He is losing it, poor thing. His mind is like Swiss cheese. He won't even remember he lived here by the time we are done. The voice filled the interrogation room. Rachel stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. She was watching herself condemn me to a nursing home. She was watching herself plan the destruction of my life. That is out of context, she shrieked. I was stressed. I didn't mean it. And this, I asked. Cole swiped the screen. The next video played. It was the footage from the night before. The drilling, the greed, the moment she smashed the cash box with the candlestick. Look at this, Travis. Look at the size of these. This is millions. The silence in the room was absolute. Travis had put his head down on the table. He was sobbing quietly. Rachel looked at the detective. He recorded us. That is illegal. That is a violation of privacy. It is his house, lady, Detective Kowalski said, his voice dripping with disgust. He can record whatever he wants, especially when you are breaking and entering. I closed the binder. I am not senile, Rachel, I said. I am not confused. I am a forensic auditor. I have built a career on documenting fraud, and you two are the sloppiest fraudsters I have ever encountered. But we are family, Rachel yelled. Her eyes were wild. You trapped us. You set us up. You told us to go there. I gave you a test, I said. A simple moral test. All you had to do was nothing. All you had to do was respect my home and my absence. If you had stayed home last night, we wouldn't be here. But you couldn't do it. You were too hungry. Cole spoke up for the first time. His voice was smooth, polished steel. Mr. Cross is pressing full charges, he said. We are submitting this binder as evidence of a pattern of harassment, elder abuse, and predatory behavior. We are also submitting the affidavit from the bank regarding Mr. Travis Cross's attempt to access the safety deposit box with a forged signature. Travis's head snapped up. You know about that? I looked him in the eye. I know everything, Travis. I know about the loan sharks. I know about the gambling. I know you tried to rob me while I was still alive because you were too cowardly to fix your own mistakes." Travis looked at me with a mix of horror and awe. He had never seen me like this. He had only ever seen the father. He had never seen the professional. "Dad," he whispered, "I am sorry." "I believe you," I said. "I believe you are sorry you got caught. But that is not the same thing as being innocent." I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. "I am done here." "Detective," I said, "you have my statement. You have the evidence." "Lock them up! Wait!" Rachel screamed. She lunged forward again, but the cuffs held her back. "You can't leave us here. We have no money for bail. We have no lawyer. You have to help us." I looked at her one last time. I looked at the woman who wanted to tear down my walls. "You wanted my assets, Rachel," I said. "You wanted the apartment. You wanted the lifestyle. Well, now you have the consequences of that ambition." I turned my back on them. I walked out of the room. I walked down the hallway of the police station. I could still hear Rachel screaming my name behind the heavy steel door. It sounded like a ghost fading into the distance. Cole walked beside me. "That was brutal, Gideon," he said. "It was necessary," I replied. We walked out into the sunlight. The city was waking up. People were going to work. The world was turning, and I was free. But there was one last card to play. One final twist of the knife that would ensure they never ever tried to come back. I stopped on the steps of the precinct. "Cole," I said, "do they know about the sale yet?" "Not yet," Cole smiled. "Good," I said. "Let's go tell them who they really robbed." The air in the holding area was stale, smelling of industrial cleaner and fear. Travis stood on the other side of the safety glass, his fingers hooked through the heavy wire mesh. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that was left was a terrified 35-year-old boy who had run out of road. "Dad," he whispered. His voice was raw, cracking under the strain of his panic. "You have to help me. You don't understand. It isn't just the police." I stood perfectly still, my hands clasped behind my back. I looked at him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. "What don't I understand, Travis?" I asked. He leaned closer to the glass, his eyes darting around the room, as if checking for invisible listeners. "The money," he hissed. "The gambling. I didn't just lose my savings, Dad. I borrowed. I borrowed from bad people. A loan shark in Cicero. I owe him $80,000. He told me if I didn't have it by Friday, he was going to put me in a wheelchair. He knows where I work. He knows where Rachel works." I listened to him. I watched the sweat bead on his forehead. So this was the catalyst. This was why he had agreed to Rachel's plan. He wasn't just greedy. He was hunted. He had tried to rob me not to get rich, but to survive the consequences of his own vices. Rachel, sitting on the metal bench behind him, looked up. Her face was a ruin of smeared makeup and despair. "Gideon, please," she begged. Her voice was thin and reedy. "Just bail us out. We will sign anything. We will sign away our rights to the inheritance. We will leave Chicago. Just get us out of here before the arraignment. If Travis goes to jail, those men, they will find him inside. They have reach." I looked at Cole. My lawyer stood next to me, immaculate in his navy suit, holding his leather briefcase like a weapon. He looked at me, waiting for the signal. I turned back to my son. "That sounds like a very dangerous situation, Travis," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the panic that was consuming him. "But it is a situation of your own making. You gambled. You lost. And instead of coming to me like a man, instead of asking for help, you decided to drill a hole in my wall. You decided to steal the safety net I spent 40 years building." "I was desperate," Travis cried. "I thought you wouldn't notice. I thought if I just took the bonds, I could pay them off and put the money back, Before you even knew, you thought I was senile, I corrected him. You thought I was a mark. Travis gripped the mesh until his knuckles turned white. Dad, please. I am your son. They are going to kill me. I nodded to Cole. It was time. Cole stepped forward. He placed his briefcase on the small ledge beneath the window. The click of the latches was loud in the quiet room. He pulled out a single document. It was a property deed transfer stamped with the official seal of Cook County, dated 5 days ago. There will be no bail, Cole said. His voice was smooth, professional, and utterly merciless. And Mr. Cross will not be intervening with the loan sharks. But I am afraid your legal situation is significantly more catastrophic than you realize. What do you mean? Rachel asked, standing up. Her hands were shaking in her cuffs. It is just burglary, right? It is a domestic dispute. We broke into a family home. The judge will go easy on us. We have no priors. Cole smiled. It was the smile of a shark that smells blood in the water. You are under the impression that you broke into Gideon Cross's apartment, Cole said. You think you destroyed your father's door. You think you damaged your father's wall. It is his apartment, Travis yelled, slamming his hand against the glass. I grew up there. I have a right to be there. It was his apartment, I said, past tense. I watched the words hit them. I watched the confusion ripple across their faces. I sold it, Travis, I said. I sold the apartment last Tuesday. I sold it to the BlackRock Residential Investment Group. They paid $2.1 million in cash. I signed a sale-leaseback agreement. I am currently just a tenant. I pay rent to a corporation. Travis stepped back as if he had been slapped. You sold it. I liquidated the asset, I said. I moved the capital along with every other dime I possess into an irrevocable blind trust. You cannot touch it. You cannot sue for it. You will never inherit it. But that is not the financial twist that should worry you. Cole picked up the thread driving the nail home. This twist, Mr. Cross, is that you did not destroy your father's property. You destroyed corporate property owned by one of the largest, most powerful, and most litigious investment firms on the planet. When the police file their report, the victim listed will not be Gideon Cross. It will be BlackRock Global Real Estate. I saw Rachel's legs give out. She slumped back onto the bench, her mouth hanging open. BlackRock does not have family meetings, I continued. My voice was hard, relentless, the voice of the auditor delivering the final report. BlackRock does not accept apologies. BlackRock has an entire division of corporate lawyers whose only job is to prosecute individuals who damage their assets. They will not drop the charges because you are my son. They will not care about your gambling debts. They will prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law to set a precedent for their insurance adjusters. Travis stared at me. The color had drained from his face completely. He wasn't looking at a father anymore. He was looking at the architect of his destruction. You set us up, he whispered. You knew. I protected my interests, I said. I identified a liability you and I removed it from my ledger. You are no longer my problem, Travis. You are a corporate write-off, and now you are BlackRock's problem. I turned my back on the cell. Dad. Travis screamed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated regret. Dad. Don't leave me, I kept walking. I walked out of the holding area, down the long corridor, and out into the bright, cold morning of Chicago. I left them in the cage they had built, trapped between the law and the corporation, with absolutely nowhere left to run. The books were balanced, and I was finally free. The elevator ride to the 14th floor of the Sovereign Tower was smooth, silent, and solitary. I stepped out into the hallway and slid my keycard into the lock of 14B. The light turned green. It was a simple mechanical affirmation of access. I belonged here. And unlike the apartment across the street, no one else had a key. I walked inside. The penthouse was bathed in the soft gray light of the Chicago morning. It was sterile, yes. The furniture was corporate beige. The art on the walls was generic abstract prints. But the air smelled clean. It didn't smell of cheap floral perfume or the sweat of desperation. It smelled of peace. I walked to the mantel. Catherine's marble urn sat there undisturbed. I placed my hand on the cool stone. I had promised her I would protect our home. In a way, I had failed. The physical structure was gone sold to a conglomerate, its door shattered by a battering ram. But I had protected the dignity of our lives. I had protected the legacy of our hard work from being squandered on gambling debts and renovations we didn't need. I had saved the essence even if I had to sacrifice the shell. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I didn't need alcohol. My head was clear. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. The police tape was still fluttering in the wind around the entrance of my old building. A restoration crew was already unloading a van. BlackRock moved fast. By noon, the door would be replaced. By tomorrow, the walls would be patched. By next week, a new tenant would be moving in unaware of the drama that had played out on those floorboards. People often tell men my age that loneliness is the enemy. They tell us to cling to family, to forgive every slight, to tolerate every disrespect, because dying alone is the ultimate failure. I stood there watching the city wake up, and I realized they were wrong. Loneliness is just a state of being alone. It is neutral. It is quiet. Betrayal, however, is a noise that never stops. It is a rot that eats you from the inside out. I had chosen loneliness over the rot, and standing there with my accounts secure and my conscience clear, it felt like the richest bargain I had ever made. My phone buzzed on the table. It was Cole. Just a text. Arrangement complete. Bail denied. BlackRock is filing civil suits Monday. I deleted the message. I didn't need to save it. The audit was closed. The file was archived. I sat down in the leather chair. I picked up a book I had been meaning to read for months. I opened it to page 1. I am Gideon Cross. I am 72 years old. I have no mortgage. I have no debts. And for the first time in a long time, I have no liabilities. I started to read. The room was silent, and it was perfect. We are often taught that family is a sanctuary, an unconditional bond that must be preserved at all costs. But I have learned that a toxic family is nothing more than a bad investment that compounds interest in pain. You cannot buy respect, and you certainly cannot rent loyalty. The moment you have to lock your doors against your own children is the moment you must realize that the relationship is already dead. True peace comes not from a full house but from a clean conscience, and the strength to close the ledger on those who only see you as a number. If you enjoyed watching the audit of a lifetime, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold. Let me know in the comments, would you have pressed charges against your own son, or would you have let him walk away?